received this message, I'm going to read it out, and then at the end I'm going to share my advice. If you have any thoughts about this, you're welcome to share it in the comments. I wanted to ask how a couple can ensure physical sexual intimacy during Ramadan. The best times to schedule it, keeping tarawih, sleep, suhoor and work times in mind. The partner who has a responsive sexual desire doesn't usually initiate, especially when under stress due to fasting and a new schedule in Ramadan. So the answer to this question depends on a few things. It depends on whether you live on your own or whether there's others that live with you, such as in-laws. It depends on whether you have kids or not, and depends on whether those kids are fasting, therefore they'll be eating iftar with you and having suhoor with you. So it depends on the kids and the ages of the kids. Also depends on where you work, whether you work outside the home or whether one or both of you work within the home. So bear in mind that my answer depends on some of those factors. So the first thing I want to say is engaging in sexual intimacy with your spouse during Ramadan is completely allowed, as long as, of course, it's outside of the fasting hours. Now, I think it goes without saying that engaging in sexual intimacy with your spouse during Ramadan doesn't need to be every single night. Of course, it can be every single night, but it might be quite challenging to go from suhoor and fast all day to having iftar and then praying tarawih and then engaging in sexual intimacy, and doing that every single night might be a bit challenging for both spouses. It's not impossible, but it might be a little bit challenging for one or both spouses. So it would be a good idea for you to communicate with your spouse, and both of you look at your work schedules and decide the best times, the best nights for you to engage in sexual intimacy, and agree on those together and schedule it in, or just verbally agree that those are the nights that you'll be engaging in sexual intimacy. So for example, it could be on Friday nights, and I'll give some examples of timings in a moment. It could be on Friday nights because most people, if they work Monday to Friday, for example, the next day they don't have to go to work. So it could be that you schedule intimacy on the weekends or on Fridays, like on the times when you know you don't have to go to work the next day. Or you can both look at your work schedules and you know that there might be specific days throughout the week when your work is a little bit less hectic or a little bit less stressful. So communicate and schedule it for it to be on those nights. Now, of course, during Ramadan, performing the tarawih prayers is extremely recommended, extremely encouraged. Having said that, performing the tarawih prayers is optional. You don't have to. I'm not saying don't perform tarawih, okay? Of course, it's highly, highly recommended, highly encouraged to perform the tarawih prayers as much as you can throughout Ramadan. Now, it might be that one or both spouses might want to miss tarawih prayers on the nights where they're engaging with sexual intimacy, especially if they really struggle with things like sleep, or struggle with attending the tarawih prayer and then coming back and being sexually intimate and then having a kind of small number of hours of sleep, and then they have to wake up for suhoor. So it could be deciding that sometimes throughout the month of Ramadan you might miss tarawih prayers, or you might want to do there are different amounts of prayers that you can do within the tarawih. You might want to opt for the shorter version of the tarawih prayers instead of the longer version. Now, this one applies to women. Obviously, when women are on their period during Ramadan, they are not supposed to fast. And so it's a little bit easier in that regard. If a woman happens to get her period at some point during Ramadan, even though she's not fasting, the husband will be fasting most likely. And so it could be easier for the woman to be sexually intimate with the husband once he's broken his fast. You can still be sexually intimate even when you're on your period, as long as there is no vaginal penetration. So it is possible for the spouses to be sexually intimate in that way, as long as there's no vaginal penetration. Okay, so here are some examples of when to schedule intimacy during Ramadan. I'm going to base this approximately on the UK timings for Fajr, Maghrib, etc. But you will need to adjust based on the region that you live in. Okay, so let's say that Fajr is at 5 a.m. And so obviously at 5 a.m. you need to not be eating from 5 a.m. onwards. Before that, usually people wake up roughly half an hour to an hour before Fajr in order for them to have their suhoor. So let's say that someone is waking up at 4 or 4:30. You will want to roughly set your alarm to be an hour before your suhoor. So if you plan to wake up for suhoor at 4 a.m. because Fajr is at 5 a.m., set your alarm for 3 a.m. You can then engage in sexual intimacy from 3 right up until Fajr, anytime then, okay? And your suhoor can be something light, it doesn't need to be something heavy. So that is one way of doing it, so that you're still getting quite a lot of sleep during the night, right after your Tarawih prayers. That's one example. Another example can be right after Maghrib prayer. So my advice would be, when it's time for Maghrib prayer, break your fast with something light, like dates, fruits, or really light snacks. Pray your prayer, pray Maghrib, and then be sexually intimate after Maghrib, before Isha, okay? Again, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, it kind of depends on some of those other factors, whether you have kids or not, whether you live with others or not. If you can't do it right after Maghrib, it can be after Isha prayer, okay? So you can pray Isha prayer and then be sexually intimate. And it also kind of depends on how close your masjid is to you and how long you plan to engage in the sexually intimate act. So it could be you pray Isha, are sexually intimate, perform your ghusl, and go and pray the Tarawih prayers. Or, you know, obviously some people like to pray the Isha prayers in the masjids. It kind of depends on those factors. So bear that in mind. It can, of course, be after Tarawih, and bear in mind the other things I said in the video. If you have work the next day or not, maybe schedule, if you're going to pray Tarawih, come home, then try and be sexually intimate on the nights where you know you don't have work the next day, if possible. But let's say that you are sexually intimate after Tarawih, but you still have work the next day. My advice would be, when you go to sleep at night, make dua to Allah and ask Allah, Ya Allah, please put barakah in this small amount of sleep that I'm going to have. Let's say you've only managed to get 4 hours sleep or 5 hours sleep, and for you it might not feel like enough. Allah can infuse barakah into those small number of hours of sleep. So make a dua and say, Ya Allah, bless me to still wake up with plenty of energy, and believe that Allah can do that for you. Of course Allah can do that for you. If you wake up the next day and you go to work and you still feel tired during the day, see if it's possible to have like a power nap, if that's available in your workplace. If not, even just kind of resting on your chair or resting like during your lunch hour where you would normally be having lunch. Obviously, if you're fasting, you're not going to be eating lunch, but go and perform your prayer if you can. Rest in that prayer place if you're able to. If not, come back to your desk, rest on the chair, rest your head on the desk. So kind of having a power nap throughout the day. Obviously, that's a little bit easier for people who work from home to have that kind of power nap during the day. Hope that was helpful. If anyone else has any other helpful comments about this topic, you're welcome to share in the comments.